can only go for an hour because I have to speak today and interact with my brothers and sisters down here in Nat Turner territory. We're only about 45 minutes from where the infamous Nat Turner Rebellion, Revolution, War took place on my birthday, August the 21st of 1831. So rest in peace to Nat Turner. Rest in peace to Mindy Gale, who was a black female revolutionary with Prophet Nat Turner. Rest in peace to the entire African Liberation Nat Turner Army of 1831. Okay? With that being said, I'm looking forward to seeing my brothers and sisters, elders, and youth from Chesapeake, Hampton, Suffolk, Portsmouth, Norfolk, Newport News, and Suffolk. I want to see all my brothers and sisters out today. Today I'm going to talk about, at my lecture, I'm not going to talk about it now. I'm going to talk about a visit I had this week to a school, a residential school, that is almost identical to the original St. Paul's College School that I wanted to purchase here in Virginia. So it is amazing that the same week that I come back to where the FDMG school search movement began, right here in the 7 cities, it is so ironic and fortuitous and coincidental that the very same place where this whole mission to build a school started, in the 7 cities of Virginia, with St. Paul's College not so far away, for me to only end up at a school just a few days ago, for sale, almost identical to St. Paul's College. And here I am, 4 years later, 4 long years of raising money, 4 long years of looking for schools, 4 long years of dealing with detractors and despisers and envious persons and haters, some of whom were right here from the 7 cities, who came to many of those meeting of the minds that we had in Suffolk, who have since joined the haters bandwagon. But be that as it may, brothers and sisters, the good news is we are 1 bid away from our first FDMG Academy. We are 1 bid away from heaven on earth. So keep me in your prayers as I submit the paperwork for the bid. I'm hoping while we are in Africa, Egypt, and Kemet and Abyssinia, all right, Kemet and Ethiopia, I'm hoping the good news will come to me that your bid has been the winning bid and the school is yours. I'm hoping to get that message while I'm at the Great Sphinx of Giza. I hope I get that message while I'm at the temples of Abu Simbel. I hope I get that message while we are on our 4-night tour down the Nile River. I hope I get that message while we are in the museum and the shrine of Emperor Menelik II, who defeated the Italians in the Battle of Ottawa. I hope I get that message while we are in the stone rock ancient Christian churches in the hills and mountains of Lalibela. I'm hoping that message comes while we are in Kemet. With that being said, let's talk about this Purge movie. Couple of points that I wanted to bring out. Couple of points. The first Purge, you need to see it. The first thing I want to say is the writers and directors of these movies owe me some money. Shout out to my good brother Ryan Coogler. You owe me some money, because some of Killmonger's lines came right out of Dr. Umar's lectures. Some of Killmonger's lines came right out of Dr. Umar's lectures. You're not going to tell me that that's a coincidence. You watch me. I know you can't admit it, but I know you follow me. It's evident from Killmonger's message. Number 2, the writers and directors of the first Purge owe me some money, because they clearly took the basis of this movie from my working theory on what's going on in Chicago. Those of you who follow my work, shout out to Chicago. I will see you at the Chicago International Arts Festival, September the 3rd, that Monday. I think that's Labor Day Monday. I will be there in the park, book pavilion. I'm hoping to have copies of the new book. Don't hold me to it, but the new book, I'm hoping to have it ready by September 3rd. Black Parent Advocate, The Art of Warfare, dealing with America's racist public and charter schools. But for those of you who have heard me discuss Chicago, And not only Chicago, but all the cities where black on black crime seems to be a major issue. I have repeatedly stated over and over again, that the murders in Chicago are not black on black crime. They are simply being presented as black on black crime. But I said that there is a mercenary army operating disguised as gangsters and civilians who are killing defenseless Africans in Chicago in the effort of population removal. You have heard me say this time and time again, that the Chicago government, the Illinois government, and the United States Department of Homeland Security, the CIA, FBI, and the military are bringing in mercenaries into Chicago, hired assassins to reduce the population of black people in Chicago. That is exactly the premise of the first Purge movie. That is exactly the premise of the first Purge movie. So for the writers of the first Purge and the writers of Black Panther, you can send your donation check to the Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey Academy. I repeat, the writers of the Black Panther movie and the writers of the first Purge, you owe me, okay? You owe me for using my intellectual property. You can send your donation to FDMG Academy, P.O. Box 6872, Philadelphia, PA 19132. And all of you need to make a donation as well. Payable to FDMG Academy, P.O. Box 6872, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania 19132. Now, first thing, I need y'all to understand this. If you've studied psychology, you know this. America has a long history of conducting very large psychological experiments related to violence and obedience to violence. Let me say it again. If you've ever studied history, you know that America, psychology in particular, the field of psychology in particular, has a very long history of studying violence so that it can be used for military, social, political, and economic purposes. I want to go over 3 of the major psychological studies that America has conducted in the past, okay, to be used to study and use violence as a weapon against groups of people. This is important because I need you to understand that the Purge movies are not imagination. The Purge movie is nothing but a replication, a sensationalized version of psychological studies that were done in America almost 50 years ago. This is not new. In fact, when you look at the way the Purge movie was conducted, it was conducted just like an experiment. And when you heard the language in the movie, they even called it an experiment. It was no coincidence it was in a black neighborhood. It was no coincidence it was in New York, the largest black metropolis in America. This is all by design. It's no coincidence they paid people $5,000 to stay at home and participate in the Purge. In fact, the first study that I want to go over is specifically relates to the Purge. The first study was the Stanley Milgram study conducted in 1961. And you know what was going on in America in 1961, black social chaos. What was going on in America in 1961, Jim Crow, civil rights. In 1961, during the civil rights struggle, Stanley Milgram at Yale University conducted an obedience to authority study on the use of violence. I want you all to know that the first Purge, and all of the Purge movies, but the first Purge speaks directly to black people. This last Purge movie speaks directly to us. This Stanley Milgram, 1961, Yale University study on the obedience to authority as it relates to the dissemination of violence. I'm going to give it to you again. The study was called The Obedience to Authority by way of use of violence. Obedience to authority by way of the use of violence. So, let me tell you what happened in the Milgram study. They had volunteers, just like the Purge movie, volunteers. Some of these volunteers were teachers, and some of these volunteers were students. Okay. The teachers were instructed to administer a shock to the students whenever they got a question wrong. The teachers were required to administer a shock to the students whenever they got a question wrong. And the more questions they got wrong, the stronger the shock violence became. Even when the students started to protest against the violence, even when the students began to protest against the violence, the teachers continued to deliver the painful shock, even when it conflicted with their own personal moral beliefs. This is important because in the first Purge movie, you had black people who didn't believe in violence, but who were willing to become violent because the government said that they could, and the government would pay them for doing so. Let me repeat that. The Purge is identical to the 1961 Stanley Milgram experiment. In both the Purge and in the Milgram experiment of Yale University, people participated in violence. In the Purge movie, it was killing. In the Milgram experiment, it was the delivery of a painful shock to students who got questions wrong. In both cases, the Purge movie and the Milgram experiment at Yale, even though what they were being asked to do, conflicted with their personal moral beliefs, they did it anyway. Why? Because authority told them to. And the conclusion of the Milgram experiment was real simple. It was concluded by the psychologists who participated that even when people disagree with what they're being asked to do, even when people disagree with what they're being asked to do, they will still do it because they are more loyal to authority that they fear. This also explains slavery. They are more loyal to the authority that they fear than they are to their own sense of moral right and wrong. I would even argue that the Purge movie was created with the Milgram experiment as a foundation. The Purge movie is an extension of the 1961 Stanley Milgram psychological study. And guess what? The teachers were not really shocking the students, but they thought they were. The students were asked to act like it was hurting. And they made it look like they were hurting even more as the experiment went on. But the teachers did not stop, even though they could clearly see people were being hurt because authority told them to keep going. So this study shows that when the government gives people permission to kill or hurt others, they will do it. The Purge is real. The Milgram studies show when the government gives people permission to hurt and kill other people, they will do it. And they will not feel guilty because they are giving up their own sense of moral right and wrong to make sure they are in obedience to authority, even when that authority is not operating from a moral premise. The Purge is real, brothers and sisters. The Purge is real, brothers and sisters. Now, let's look at this. They interviewed everyone who participated in the study. Certain people they did not use. Remember the brother who was the drug dealer? The brother who was the drug dealer, what was his name? What was his name? The brother who was the leader, who ultimately saved the day. They didn't recruit him for the experiment. You know why? He was too conscious. And because he was too conscious, even as a drug dealer, he would have been useless to the struggle. And the irony in the movie is that the protagonist, the drug dealing brother who ultimately became the protagonist, although in the beginning of the movie he started as an antagonist, he became the protagonist, the hero, the savior, the hero, okay? He became the savior. He would not compromise his sense of right and wrong just to make drug profits. He would not compromise his sense of right and wrong just to make drug profits. So him and his gang, his family, because I don't like to use the word gang, I say family, okay? They became the Nat Turner Liberation Army in the first Purge. He became the Nat Turner Liberation Army in the first Purge. And the reason he was never interviewed, and this is important, they never choose black folks for social experiments who love their people. They never choose black folks for social experiments who are too conscious or knowledgeable. They never use black folks for social experiments who are awakened to the reality of racism and white supremacy. Him and the members of his drug cartel were useless. Why? Even though they were selling drugs, they were not afraid of white folks, nor was their thinking in alignment with the dominant narrative of white America. Everybody they chose for the experiment was an unconscious Negro. Many of them were innocent. Many of them were innocent. But they were unconscious Negroes. They didn't know nothing about nothing. So they always find you neutral, multicultural Negroes to draft into these social experiments. America loves a neutral, multicultural, colorblind Negro that it can use for these social experiments. So I thought that was very key that was in the movie. The whole movie was a psychological experiment. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And what was the first question they asked people when they interviewed them in the movie? What was the first question they asked people when they interviewed them? Do you think you are capable of hurting someone? First question. First question. Do you think you are capable of hurting someone? And most of the brothers and sisters said what? Yes. And why did they say yes? Not because they wanted to hurt other blacks, but they said what? I am so angry. I am so full of hurt. I am so full of pain. I am so full of wrath that I need to let this out. See, the ghetto is an experiment. The ghetto is a Skinner box. The black American ghetto is nothing more than a white man's project. They pack us in. They take our jobs. They feed us dope. They send in the guns. They mess up the schools. And all we do is turn on each other. Why? Because we're not conscious that there's people outside of this box that controls what goes on in the box. Let me say it again. The reason why we are turning on each other, the reason why we are fighting each other in the ghettos of America is because we are inside of the white man's experimental box, and many of us are not conscious that the box is being controlled from the outside. So you have Negroes who say things like, we are our own worst enemy. Don't bring up the white man because we're doing this to ourselves. No one else is responsible for this but us. That's what a coon says. That's what an ignorant Negro says. That's what an African who doesn't understand his political time of day would believe. He's only looking at what's in the box. In the box, poor blacks. In the box, angry blacks. In the box, killing blacks. In the box, drug-selling blacks, gun-toting blacks, unemployed blacks, in and out of prison blacks. But you're not looking at the fact that this box is totally controlled by outsiders. The purge. The purge. The purge. The box is totally controlled. And all you have to do is ask yourself. All you have to do is ask yourself, do we control any of the institutions in this box called a ghetto? Who owns the stores? You don't. Who runs the schools? You don't. Who sends the police in? You don't. Who brings in the dope? You don't. Who locks people up? You don't. Who brings in the guns? You don't. You buy them, you use them, you shoot them, but you don't own, you don't produce, you don't distribute. The whole black community is nothing but a psychological experiment. They are puppeteering us from downtown. They are puppeteering us from your state legislature. They are puppeteering us from the United States government, brothers and sisters. Now, the young sister in the movie at one point said what? When she was on top of the car? She said the purge is nothing but the monetization and the incentivization. She said the purge was the monetization and the incentivization of murder, black on black crime, monetization. They're going to pay you $5,000 to participate in the purge. So they monetize in Black Death. They monetize Black Death. And then they incentivize it. Not only do you get paid, there's other types of pranks and gifts and accolades and privileges that you may get if you participate in this. That's exactly what goes on in Black America every day. They monetize and incentivize cooning. Why do we have so many coons in the black community? We got poor coons, rich coons, unemployed coons, middle-class coons, religious coons. We got hotep coons, conscious coons. You know why we have so many coons? Because those that control the box pay you to coon, and they incentivize your cooning. Look at all the black people you see on the news, CNN and C-SPAN. Look at all the athletes you see, the Shaquille O'Neals and Charles Barkleys of the world. You know why they're on TV? Because the power structure knows they would never say or do anything to go against the narrative that this nation wants to share to the world. They monetize the coons, and then they incentivize the coons. You can become a millionaire if you're willing to be a coon. Cash for cooning is what America is about. Since the days of slavery, the house Negro was monetized and incentivized to snitch on the field Africans. The house Negroes were monetized and incentivized to snitch on the field Negroes. Monetizing coonism has always been the modus operandi here. So everyone in the movie, The First Purge, was screened for the potential for violence. They were all asked if they were capable of committing violence. Now, the experiment took place on Staten Island. Why did they use Staten Island? Why Staten Island? I would argue that one of the reasons Staten Island was chosen as a site for this experiment is because Staten Island, unlike many of the other boroughs, doesn't have as many ways in and ways out. Okay? Staten Island doesn't have as many ways in and ways out as Brooklyn, Harlem, the Bronx. So they wanted a place where they could control not only the violence, but people's reaction to it. They needed to control not only the violence, but people's reaction to it. And because this was an extermination project, disguised as an experiment, because this was an extermination project, disguised as an experiment, they needed to reduce the amount of people who would try to opt out of the experiment and run away. They needed to control the amount of people who may want to opt out and run away, brothers and sisters. But wait a minute. Haven't we had in American history other extermination projects disguised as experiments? The Tuskegee syphilis experiment was an extermination experiment disguised as a health experiment. Most of the diseases we get as Africans were the outgrowth of extermination projects disguised as health projects, which is why you need to stop volunteering your health and well-being for money. Stop volunteering your health and well-being for money. Now, also, there was a scene in the movie where there was a bodyguard. When a young conscious sister came into the gym, when she found out her brother was selling drugs, she wanted to approach the drug dealer who became the protagonist. Okay? She was stopped by the security guard, and the security guard was wearing this. The security guard was wearing this. Do y'all remember that? The security guard was wearing a red, black, and green medallion. The security guard for the drug dealer was wearing a red, black, and green medallion. Why did the security guard for the drug dealer, why was he wearing a red, black, and green medallion? I will tell you why. You tend to see this in conscious movies. Not conscious movies, in blaxploitation movies. You always find some unrighteous Negro with a red, black, and green medallion or a red, black, and green wristband. And guess what, brothers and sisters? The reason they love to put this on the criminals, the reason they love to put this on those who do wrong, the reason they love to put this on the antagonist is because they're trying to do what? Associate in the American mind negativity and crime with the RBG movement. Let me say it again. They're trying to associate in people's minds slowly by introducing the red, black, and green in negative personalities in these movies. They're doing that so they can associate our symbols of liberation with crime and degradation. They want to associate our symbols of liberation with crime and degradation. So once we begin to organize and fight, people will look at us like we are terrorists. Why? Because in the movies, like the first Purge, people who don't know the history of this flag, people who don't know that this is the RBG Marcus Garvey Pan-African flag that was given to us by our Pan-Africanist elders in 1920 to represent Africans, they will misinterpret that and say this is about violence and hatred. We don't believe in racism. We don't practice racism. We don't practice bigotry. We don't practice hatred. But they want to associate our symbols with that type of behavior so when the revolution comes, we can be exterminated in the media. We can be exterminated in the media, misrepresented in the media to make it easier to justify the killing of black liberation fighters. What did Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz have to say? Hold on. This is Dr. Umar Johnson speaking. Hello? Good afternoon, sister. What can I do for you? Yes, ma'am. There are 25 online, 30 at the door. If this is your cell number, I can text you the link if you like. All children are free. All elders 65 and older are free. 17 and under free. College students is $10 with ID. Yes, ma'am. I'll text it right now. Thank you, sister. See you soon. So we got to be very careful about seeing that type of stuff. Symbology, the way they use symbols to try to misrepresent us because they know we coming. This flag will reign supreme one day. Marcus Garvey said it is our destiny for the red, black, and green to be planted in the hilltops of Africa. We will get there, brothers and sisters. Let me text the sister real quick this information. Give me 1 second. This was not just the movie. The Purge was not just the movie. It shows that was going on in Chicago. And what else did you see in the Purge? You saw, they said, well, what did the brother say in the movie? He said, these are not Americans. He said, these are not Americans. He said, these are Germans and Russians that they are bringing into America's cities disguised as gangsters to kill off blacks. He said they're not even using white Americans. They are importing white mercenaries from other countries. They are importing white mercenaries from other countries. That was in the first Purge. If you missed it, go see it again. That was critical. They're not using America's cops. They are immigrating. They're bringing in. They are importing the mercenaries. Very powerful. You got to see that movie again. It was very powerful. And then there was also a scene in the movie, if you remember. There was a scene in the movie. Let me get rid of this. Somebody hate being black. Let me get them off my feed. Let me say this. If you are not an African, I respect whatever you choose to call yourself. But I'm going to ask you to respect those of us who have pride and honor and faith and confidence and respect in who we are. If you are indigenous to America, if you are Native American, if you are Aboriginal, if you are Hebrew, whatever you are, I will respect your right to self-define you. You have a right to self-definition. I have no problem with you defining yourself. My only problem is when you self-hating Negroes try to force your identities on us. Don't come on my page with your anti-African rhetoric, okay? I will never argue you about what you want to call yourself. I'm glad you're not an African because I want nothing to do with your ass anyway. But stay off of my page, okay? So let me text the sister real quick. Okay. There was a scene in the movie where one of the white mercenaries was wearing a blackface mask. Did y'all see that? Did y'all see that? There was a scene in the movie where one of the mercenaries was wearing a black-faced mask. That's significant. A black-faced mask. That is significant. You know what that meant? That meant that this killing going on in Chicago and many of America's black cities is not being done by black men. But there are masks that they can wear that make them appear as us, especially with a hat, especially with a hoodie, especially with a cape. Yes, you have people in blackface in masks that look like us. They have these masks that are so real, that it looks like an African. And through the use of these deceptive devices like the skin masks, they are killing other black folks. This is happening today in America. Today in America. So let's go back. Okay. They also talked about in the movie a flower that makes people violent. Did y'all catch that? We're talking about the first Purge movie. This is Dr. Umar Johnson, the Prince of Pan-Africanism. I am here in Suffolk, Virginia. I will be speaking today, 4 p.m., Temple Bethel. Come on out. Okay, you still have 4 hours to get here. Okay, I will take the stage around 4:30. Okay, doors open up at 3. All children free, all elders free. College students $10 with ID. Today in Suffolk, Virginia. drumarjohnson.eventbrite.com. You can also get your tickets online. I had a couple messages from brothers and sisters asking about the first annual course of African philosophy. Yes, we still have some seats. If you want to be in the first annual course of Pan-African philosophy, one Saturday a month for 12 months. One Saturday every month for 12 months. Send me an autobiographical letter of interest, to Dr. Umar Johnson at yahoo.com. If you want to be in the course of Pan-African philosophy, it is not online. It is only face-to-face. The first class will be in Philadelphia Saturday, September the 8th. The first class will be in Philadelphia Saturday, September the 8th. Okay? Send an email, Dr. Umar Johnson at yahoo.com, to be in that class. Okay? 12 hours, one Saturday a month for 12 months. 144 class hours. Okay? Make sure you continue to donate to the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy as well. But they talked of a flower that made people violent. Why is that important? In the Black Panther movie, there was a flower that gave the Black Panther his power. So here we are with the first Purge movie, and once again, this idea of a flower giving power. They're talking about herbs. They're talking about herbs. And we know all drugs come from herbs. We know this. Opium comes from the poppy seed. And we also know that the CIA has been engaging in mind control psychological experiments since the 1940s in an attempt to alter the conscience of people so they can commit senseless acts of violence. When they spoke of a flower that makes you murder people, they're talking about drug-induced states of paranoia that can motivate people to participate in senseless acts of violence, like Sandy Hook, like Dylan Roof, like the Dark Knight killers, okay? Like the sniper, Lee Boyd Malvo, John Ali Muhammad. Most of the men who participated in these senseless random acts of mass murder, most of them are either ex-military or they are related to ex-military. So the message here is the CIA never gave up its mind control experiments. The CIA never gave up its mind control experiments. They still conduct those experiments to this day. And I would argue that a lot of these killings, most are mercenaries, we know that. But when a black man really does kill, we have to look into their history, because some of them were ex-military who had their mind played with. The CIA is creating an army of Manchurian candidates. Listen to me. Listen to me well. Right now, the CIA is creating an army of black Manchurian candidates. This is why I don't like sending our children into the military. This is why I don't like sending children into the military. The CIA is conducting psychological experiments using drugs and herbs and other energies to create an army of senseless black killers. And you saw one in the first Purge movie. You saw one of these senseless black killers that the CIA created in the first Purge movie. His name was Skeletor. His name was Skeletor. His name was Skeletor. Skeletor was the symbol of the CIA's black Manchurian candidate army that is currently being created in America. God forbid, and I hope we never see this. God forbid, and I hope we never see this. But they are planning to release into our community CIA mind control research victims. CIA mind control research victims. They're going to release them into our community. And these senseless black men and women, victims of mental terrorism, victims of psychological terrorism, will begin to conduct mass extermination shootings. What Dylan Roof did, they want to engineer blacks to do on a mass scale. Listen to me. Listen to me. The terrorist today is white. Tomorrow they want them to look like you. Today the terrorist is white. Tomorrow they want them to look like you. And guess what? Do you know how beneficial that would be to the police genocide campaign? Do you know how beneficial it would be to the police genocide campaign to have black men as the face of domestic terrorism? Now when the police kill off black men, who's going to protest? Once you make the black man the image of domestic terrorism, we're already the image of crime. We're already the image of athletes. We're already the image of inmates and prisoners. We're already the image of deadbeat dads. We're already the image of everything. But they have not made us yet the image of domestic terrorism. They haven't done that yet. They haven't done that yet. See, this black identity extremism thing, this new COINTELPRO called Black Identity Extremism, this new COINTELPRO called Black Identity Extremism has another loop to it, brothers and sisters. It has another loop. If they can make black men and women terrorists through the CIA's MK Ultra and then link that to black identity extremism, that would mean anyone promoting liberation. Anyone promoting liberation will be viewed as a killer and a terrorist. And that is not who we are. That's why gangster rappers have to stop allowing themselves to be used to pervade this image of black men as being ultra-violent. Our actors have to stop allowing themselves to be used to pervade the image of black men and women as violent perpetrators of crime. We cannot allow our image to be degraded to that point because it becomes dangerous. That becomes a risk of life threat for all African people. We are the only people in the world who participate in the extermination of our own public image. We're the only people in the whole world who participates in the public extermination of our own image. And did you also recognize in the movie The Purge. A white woman was murdered. A white woman was murdered. And when the white woman was murdered, the director, the executive director of the Purge campaign ordered them to remove that clip from the footage. Why did he tell them to remove the footage of the white woman being murdered so no one would know? Because the white woman is the most valued life in America. The white female is the most valued life in America. So the reason they had to remove footage of the white woman being murdered is if Americans saw a white woman being victimized by this government-sponsored purge, they would call off the purge. Not to save black people. Who cares about black people? They wouldn't call off the purge to save black people. They would call off the purge to save white women. The message is, when white females are affected by government-sponsored terrorism, they never put it on the news. They don't want the world to see when white women are victims of America's own homegrown violent projects. You see? Anything meant to exterminate blacks, if a white person's life is taken, they are considered collateral damage and it is removed from the footage. Because if white people find out that their own people are being victimized by America's project to exterminate Africans, they will call it off. They will call it off under white supremacy. You cannot victimize white women even if it is to exterminate blacks. You cannot victimize the white female even if it is to exterminate the blacks. Now, at the same time, for those of you who saw the movie, you notice that the executive director of the Purge, when the first kill took place, remember, in the beginning, black people wasn't killing each other. In the beginning, black people wasn't killing each other in the movie, remember? They said this is not a success. They're not killing each other. And then when the first murder took place, what did the executive director order? When the first murder took place in the movie, he said, put that on the news. He said, get that out. Show the country that they are purging in Staten Island. Why was it so important to show that a purge had taken place? You know why it was so important to show that a purge had taken place? It's because when you show violence on the TV, it makes it more likely that other people will participate in it. This is a psychological fact. The more violence you see, the more desensitized you become to it. Let me say it again. The more violence you see, the more desensitized you become to violence. If you don't see violence, you don't think about it. You know why police are killing more black people? Because they see police on the news kill black people. So they're getting desensitized. And then they see the police are not even held responsible for those murders. So you're going to get more police brutality. Because the news media is desensitizing us to police violence. How do you desensitize? You constantly show it over and over. If you watch rape 1,000 times, after that 1,000th rape, it won't bother you as much. You see somebody get killed over and over again. After 100 kills, it won't bother you as much. So the reason they put that first purge on the TV is they wanted to desensitize all of the blacks in Staten Island to violence. And what happened after that first kill? After the first kill went across the media, after the first kill was shown all over the news, everybody started killing. This is a psychological fact that you use television and the news media not to report crime, but to create crime. You use the television and the news media not to report crime, but to create crime. You use the television and the news media not to report crime, but to create the crime. And then there was a Dylan Roof episode in the movie. There was a Dylan Roof episode in the movie. There was a Dylan Roof episode in the movie when the Ku Klux Klan, notice they had KKK and the white racist armies in this movie. They went into a black church and murdered all the black people in the church. What were they talking about? The symbol was the Dylan Roof, Charleston, South Carolina murders may have been government orchestrated. The Dylan Roof, South Carolina church murder may not have been purely an individual crime of passion. I think we have yet to learn the full story of Dylan Roof, because there's 1 million black churches between his hometown in Charleston. There's 1 million black churches between his hometown and Charleston. Why did he choose that one? Dylan Roof did not act alone. He did not act alone. And that's why they put the Dylan Roof scene in the first Purge movie, so you could see that the writers of this film have been listening to me, and they concur that that was a government orchestration. He did not act alone. The DC sniper did not act alone. Timothy McVeigh did not act alone. The Dark Knight killings did not act alone. Sandy Hook did not act alone. Is it possible, brothers and sisters, and I'm going to begin to wrap up because it's 1 o'clock. I'm going to have to finish this. I'm going to have to do a part 2 to the Purge movie review because of time constraints. I'm going to have to do a part 2 to the first Purge movie review due to time constraints. But I want to say a few things. Skeletor, the CIA's mind control project in the first Purge movie. Did you notice at the very end of the movie, he came back to his own consciousness and he tried to help the protagonist fight against the Nazis? Do you remember that? Skeletor was able to come back to his consciousness at the end of the movie, and he tried to help our brother fight, and he was murdered. Okay, so that represents African people losing consciousness, but yet still having the quality of the redemptive spirit within us, because we are gods and goddesses. We are gods and goddesses. So no matter how much decay and filth and conditioning and mental programming that they reap upon us, we still have a God-given ability to resuscitate our soul. And Skeletor was resuscitating his soul, and he tried to come back and help his people. He tried to come back and help his people. But here's interesting. This relationship between Donald Trump and Putin, this relationship between President Trump and Putin, I'm wondering, brothers and sisters, I'm wondering, is it possible that Donald Trump has an agreement with Putin to bring mercenaries into America's inner cities, disguised as black men and women and gangsters, and use mercenaries from Russia to kill off Africans and then send those mercenaries back home to Russia? Is it possible? Is it possible that this new relationship between Russia and America, two racist European countries, is it possible that they are in a conversation where They collaborate on certain projects. And is it possible that Russia is supplying America's inner cities with undercover mercenary armies to exterminate black people? I'm just asking a question. I haven't seen any evidence. I'm just asking a question, because we do know that after the German European Jewish Holocaust, the American government embarked upon certain undercover secret experiments like Operation Paperclip, where they brought some of the top Nazi scientists to America to work for the American government. So is it possible that you're using racists in Europe and you're bringing them here to participate in your extermination campaign against African people? Is it possible? We can't rule out any possibilities. We cannot rule out any possibilities. I want to give you another experiment. 1967, University of Pennsylvania. Martin Seligman, Learned Helplessness Study. 1967, University of Pennsylvania, Martin Seligman conducted a learned helplessness study. This is important because I need y'all to know that they are controlling black people with scientific principles. They are using behavioral psychology to control us. They are using science. In 1967, UPenn, Martin Seligman demonstrated that you can teach people not to resist your power. You can teach people to accept punishment, degradation, racism, oppression, systematic injustice, and bias. How did they teach black people to submit to this? And is it a coincidence that Martin Seligman's University of Pennsylvania Learned Helplessness Study took place 1 year before they killed Dr. King and remade Black America? Is it a coincidence that the 1967 University of Pennsylvania Learned Helplessness experiment took place 1 year before they assassinated Dr. King and remade Black America? They remade us in 1970. The African American of 1970 is totally different from the African American of 1960, 1950, 1940, and I dare not say 1920. The Garvey African American was totally different. The Garvey African American was the most progressive one that we've had. They remade us. And they did it with these research experiments. In 1967, Martin Seligman used dogs. He used dogs. And he would signal the dog. And when he signaled the dog jumped. But the wall was so high that the dog couldn't get over the jump. So every time the dog got signaled or shocked, the dog tried to run away. But they had the wall so high, the dog could never jump over the wall. He kept failing and failing and failing because the wall was so high. But then, after they did this, once they conditioned him with the belief he could not win, once they conditioned the dogs with the belief that the dogs could not win, once they did that, they lowered the wall all the way down. Follow me, brothers and sisters. This 1967 University of Pennsylvania study is monumental for understanding black people. It is monumental. After they conditioned the dog so the dog couldn't jump over the wall, they lowered the wall. So now it was easy for the dog to jump over. And guess what? They expected the dog to jump over the low wall when he was shocked. Only this time, after failing so many times to get over the high wall, after the dogs failed so many times to get over the high wall, They dropped it real low. And they said, now when we shock them, they're going to run. But that's not what happened. But that's not what happened. But that's not what happened. Guess what happened, brothers and sisters? The dog would not move. The wall was low enough for the dog to walk over it, but the dog would not move. The dog wouldn't try to jump the wall. The dog didn't think about jumping the wall, and they would shock the dog, and the dog would just stay there. They would shock the dog, and the dog would just stay there. If you don't believe me, do your own research. Famous psychological experiment, 1967, University of Pennsylvania, Martin Seligman, and it was called the Learned Helplessness Study. And they proved that when people repeatedly fight and they lose, they reach a point where they give up. They reach a point where they give up. And I am telling you now, brothers and sisters, 45 minutes away from Nat Turner land, I'm telling you that we as a people suffer from learned helplessness, the psychology of defeat. We don't think we can win anymore. And once your enemy convinces you that you cannot win, you're already dead. Maybe not in the body, but definitely in the mind. I study psychology to understand its military implications. I study psychology to understand its political implications. I study psychology to understand its revolutionary implications. Brothers and sisters, there's other studies, but for the sake of time, I want to let y'all know I will be in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, August the 31st. Get your tickets. The Prince of Pan-Africanism will be in Elizabeth City, North Carolina for the first time ever, Friday, August 31st. He will be in Raleigh, North Carolina, Sunday, September the 2nd. Raleigh, North Carolina, Sunday, September the 2nd. Shreveport, Louisiana for the first time, Friday, September the 14th. Shreveport, Louisiana for the first time, Friday, September 14th. Dallas, Texas, Sunday, September 16th. Dallas, Texas. Sunday, September 16th. Dallas, Texas. Sunday, September 16th. Brothers and sisters, this is Dr. Umar Johnson. Come on out today, Suffolk, Virginia, Temple Beth El, 3927 Bridge Road. Doors at 3, lecture at 4, children and elders free, college students $10 with ID. This is the Prince of Pan-Africanism, Black Power.